Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Cosmic Bedtime. Tonight we drift toward a moon that holds an entire ocean's worth of rivers and lakes and rain, and yet not one drop of it is water, and not one spark of it will ever catch fire, no matter how close a flame might come. That is the small, strange paradox waiting for you tonight. A world soaked in fuel that can never burn, patient and unbothered. Resting in the dark, far past the reach of any match. We have 4 slow regions to drift through tonight, and you do not have to hold on to a single one of them. First, we arrive on a world where water itself has turned to stone, where the ground beneath our feet is ice grown as hard as granite, and where the cold has quietly rearranged everything you thought you knew about solid ground. Then we settle beside seas of fuel that can never burn, learning why the very chemistry of fire is denied here, out in a hush so complete that flame has no way to begin. After that, we watch a slow orange weather move across the sky, rain falling in fat, unhurried drops, rivers carrying it home the way a lullaby carries a held breath. And last, we sink into hidden depths, a buried ocean of real water sleeping far beneath the frozen crust, and the long, patient story of how we came to know it was there at all. You can let all 4 of these regions go now, because I will carry them for you, one at a time, while you simply rest. If any part of this journey settles into you the way a warm blanket settles over tired shoulders, a like or a subscribe helps the channel reach others who are also lying awake tonight, somewhere out there, looking for this same easy way down into sleep. But that is only if you want to. Nothing here asks anything of you. There is nothing here to hold on to, and nothing you need to remember, and nothing you need to understand before your eyes are allowed to close. Let your shoulders ease down into whatever is holding you right now. The mattress, the pillow, the low hum of the room around you. Let your jaw loosen. Let your hands go heavy and open, however they happen to be resting. Feel the weight of the blanket, or the air, or the dark itself settle over you like something that has been waiting all day just to hold you. Settle in. Let's begin. And so, as your breathing settles and the last of tonight's tension loosens from your shoulders, let yourself drift outward, past the moon you know, past the asteroid rubble, past the orange-banded giant that rules the outer dark, until a smaller shape resolves ahead of you, hazy, amber, wrapped in its own private weather. You are not falling. You are being carried, the way a leaf is carried, on a current too gentle to notice, down through layer after layer of tangerine haze, thick as a memory of autumn, until the fog finally parts beneath you and a whole world opens up, waiting, the way a room waits when you already know it will be warm. This is Titan, the largest moon of Saturn, bigger than the planet Mercury, wrapped in an atmosphere so dense and so orange that for centuries it kept every one of its secrets pressed close against its chest. From this safe height, drifting just above the last curtain of cloud, you can see that it is, unmistakably, a world with shorelines. There are rivers below you, winding the way rivers always wind, unhurried, patient, finding the lowest path the way water always has. There are seas with real coastlines, inlets, deltas fanning out where a channel meets a basin. There is rain somewhere above those seas right now, falling in its own low rhythm, the way it has fallen here for longer than there have been eyes on Earth to watch anything fall at all. Nothing about the outline of this place resists you. If you had been set down here with your eyes closed and only allowed to trace the coastline with your fingertips, you might have believed, for a long while, that you were tracing the coast of some hidden lake on the world you already know. The same lazy curves, the same fingers of shoreline reaching into the same soft bays. The same braided channels arriving from higher ground, the way every young river arrives, uncertain, then confident, then wide. Titan wears the geography of home. It has the grammar of a familiar planet, written out again in an unfamiliar ink. Everything about this scene wants to be familiar. The shape of a river doesn't care what fills it. A shoreline curves the same soft way, whether it holds water or something else entirely. And that is the quiet turn in tonight's story. The one thing worth holding on to as you continue your descent. What fills these rivers, what fills these seas, what falls from these clouds, is not water. It is methane. It is ethane. It is liquid natural gas, the very thing that back on the world you came from gets burned in stoves and furnaces and the quiet blue flame under a kettle. Here it is simply rain. Here it is simply the sea. Let that settle into you slowly, the way a scent settles into a room. Titan's rivers, the ones curling below you right now in the hazy amber light, are rivers that would burn if anyone ever struck a match. Every one of them. Every lake, every shoreline pool, every raindrop still falling somewhere above the clouds, all of it is fuel. In the plain chemical sense, the same family of molecule that keeps a pilot light lit above a stove. And yet, none of it will ever catch. None of it has ever caught. Not once, not in all the long seasons this moon has turned around its enormous parent planet. These are rivers that would burn if anyone ever struck a match, and no one ever will. There is no match here. There is no spark waiting in the wings. Titan's thick, hazy sky holds nitrogen in abundance and methane in gentle supply, but it holds no oxygen at all. And without oxygen there is no fire, not from lightning, not from friction, not from anything you could imagine trying. The fuel simply rests. It pools in its basins and slides down its channels and falls as soft rain onto a world with no flame anywhere in it. And it will go on resting, unlit, for as long as this moon continues to turn. You can let that thought hold you the way a held breath finally releases. There is something almost unbearably peaceful in a world built entirely from combustible rivers that will never combust, a whole ocean's worth of potential fire, and absolute, permanent safety, existing in the very same place, at the very same time, forever. It is the kind of paradox that only makes sense once you stop needing it to resolve and simply let it be true. Tonight, that is the thread you'll follow all the way down into rest. Rivers that would burn and never, ever will. Think, for a moment, of every small flame you have ever known. A candle guttering on a windowsill, a match cupped against the wind, the blue ring under a kettle just before sleep. Each of those flames needed three things to arrive together, in the same instant, in the same place. Something that could burn, something hot enough to start it burning, and air rich enough in oxygen to feed it once it caught. Titan, drifting below you now in its hazy amber light, has arranged its whole existence so that only the first of those three things is ever present. The fuel is here in astonishing abundance. The heat is not. This is one of the coldest surfaces in the entire outer solar system. And the oxygen, the one ingredient every fire ultimately depends on, was simply never made here at all. Because oxygen is not a given of any world. It is a strange and hard-won gift, brewed slowly by living things breathing sunlight into air. Titan has no such history. And so its rivers keep their secret perfectly, not through luck, but through the plain, dependable arithmetic of chemistry itself. From up here, drifting lower still, you can begin to trace the shape of the whole journey ahead of you, the way you might glance once at a long and easy road before letting the car simply carry you down it. First there is the cold, a cold so complete, so far beyond anything felt on the world you left behind, that it quietly rewrites what counts as rock and what counts as river, turning the very water that built your bones and your oceans into something as hard and unmoving as stone. You will feel that cold not as a threat, but as a kind of stillness, a deep freeze so total it becomes almost restful, the way the inside of a winter night feels hushed rather than harsh once you're safely wrapped and warm. Then there are the seas themselves, vast dark mirrors spread across Titan's northern reaches, so calm and so smooth that starlight barely ripples across them. Seas so undisturbed you could believe, for a moment, that stillness itself had become a kind of liquid. You will drift low over them later tonight, low enough to feel what it might be like to be held on their glassy surface, weightless, unhurried, cradled by a gravity so gentle it is barely there at all. And there is the weather, slow clouds gathering above those seas, drawing up the very fuel that fills them, carrying it inland, releasing it again as unhurried rain that falls for hours, sometimes days, in drops heavier and lazier than any raindrop you've ever felt land on your own skin. It is a whole cycle of evaporation and cloud and rainfall, playing out again and again across seasons that last not weeks but years, a weather system with nowhere to rush to and nothing urgent left to prove. And beneath all of it, waiting at the end of tonight's descent, there is the knowing, the patient, decades-long human effort to understand this small orange world at all. A point of light first noticed centuries ago, a little parachute drifting down through this very haze not so very long ago, landing gently on damp, rounded pebbles of ice, sending back the first true photograph of a shoreline no human eye had ever seen. That story, too, is part of tonight, folded quietly beneath the rivers and the seas and the slow amber rain, waiting for you near the very end, when it will be easiest simply to let it lull you the rest of the way down. But first, before the cold, before the seas, before any of that, there is only this: the hazy gold light around you, the rivers curling below, the rain somewhere above the clouds, all of it built from fuel instead of water. All of it perfectly, permanently unlit. And so, drifting a little lower still, wrapped in that strange and lovely paradox, you might find yourself asking the same soft question that eventually settles over anyone who comes this close to Titan and simply looks, not with alarm, not with any need to solve it tonight, but the way you'd ask a question just before sleep, already half inside the answer. Why did this small, patient, orange world end up with rivers of fuel, while the world you came from, spinning far behind you now, ended up with rivers of water instead? And no spark will ever find them, because the very air above those rivers refuses to carry one, which is worth sitting with for a moment. Before we ask why the world beneath them is built the way it is, to understand a river that can never burn, you first have to understand the cold it was born into. Because on Titan, the cold is not simply weather. It is the architect. It is the rule beneath every other rule. Titan orbits nearly 1 billion miles from the sun, so far out that sunlight itself arrives thinned to almost nothing. About 1% of what falls on your own skin on an ordinary afternoon at home. Imagine standing under a sky lit only by a small, steady coin of brightness, a sun reduced to something closer to a very bright star, giving warmth so faint it barely counts as warmth at all. That thin light lands on a surface resting near -179 degrees Celsius, 94 Kelvin, if you prefer counting up from the coldest possible cold rather than down from the freezing of water. And even that faint light doesn't fully land. Titan wraps itself in a haze of hydrocarbon smog, a high orange veil that does something almost the opposite of what our own atmosphere does. Where Earth's air traps heat and holds it close, like a blanket pulled up to the chin, Titan's haze does the reverse. It absorbs sunlight high up in the thin outer layers and radiates much of that warmth back into space before it ever reaches the ground. Scientists call this an anti-greenhouse effect, and you can picture it simply as a moon that keeps its own light at arm's length, letting only a hush of warmth trickle down to the surface far below. At -179 degrees, something remarkable happens to water, the very substance that fills your rivers and your bathtubs and your own quiet cells. It stops being able to flow at all. Down here, on this warm blue world of ours, we think of water as the flowing thing, the yielding thing, the substance that always finds the lowest path and pools softly wherever it is allowed to rest. But that gentleness of water is a privilege of temperature, not a law of the universe. Take away enough warmth and water forgets how to be liquid. It hardens, it stiffens, it becomes something you could build a house from. On Titan, water ice is not the fragile, slippery stuff that forms on a winter pond back home. At 94 Kelvin, water ice behaves less like the ice in your freezer and more like stone, harder, in fact, than granite, because the cold has locked its crystal structure into something dense and unyielding. This is worth pausing on, because it means that everything we associate with rock on Titan is quietly made of water. The mountains that rise along Titan's equatorial belt, ridged and pale under the haze, are not made of basalt or granite in the way Earth's mountains are. They are water, frozen so completely, so thoroughly, that it has become the bedrock of an entire world. The pebbles that Titan's own weather has rounded and scattered across its plains, smoothed the way river stones are smoothed on Earth, tumbled gently against one another over years of patient flow. Those pebbles, too, are water, frozen so hard it forgot every property you have ever associated with it. No softness left in it at all. No give. Think of it this way. If it helps you rest into the strangeness of it, everywhere on Titan that you would expect stone under your feet, you would instead be standing on the frozen memory of what, on a different world, might have been a puddle. The bones of this moon, its crust, its highlands, the low ridges that catch the faint light along the horizon, are built from water that gave up flowing so long ago, and so completely, that it now holds up mountains instead of filling cups. It is a kind of quiet inversion, one that asks you to set aside a lifetime of assumptions and simply watch. The substance you have always thought of as liquid has become the ground itself, patient and unmoving, while something else entirely has taken on the job that water always did back home. And this is where the rivers come back into the picture, those rivers that would burn if anyone ever struck a match, and no one ever will. They do not carve their paths through soil or through crumbling rock the way rivers do on Earth. They carve their paths through this waterstone, this bedrock of ancient ice, cutting slow channels into ground that used to be the most ordinary liquid imaginable and is now the hardest, most permanent thing on the moon. Picture a river of liquid fuel moving unhurried across a plain, its bed and banks made entirely of frozen water so cold and so solid it might as well be marble. The liquid that flows is the guest here. The water that doesn't flow is the host. Everything is reversed. And yet everything still fits together the way a river always has, banks holding a channel guiding a current finding, eventually, some low and waiting sea. It helps, maybe, to think of temperature as a kind of gatekeeper standing at the door of every substance, deciding whether it is allowed to be a solid or a liquid or a gas on any given world. On Earth, that gatekeeper lets water through as a liquid across nearly the whole range of temperatures we ever encounter. A whole planet's worth of oceans and rain and tears, all owing their existence to a gatekeeper that happens to favor water within our comfortable range. Take that same gatekeeper and move it out to Titan's orbit, into that dim 1% light, into that 94 Kelvin hush, and the answer flips entirely. Now water is refused. Now water is told firmly to stand at the back of the room and hold still, to become the walls and the floor rather than anything that moves. The door that was open for water on Earth is closed on Titan, bolted by cold so deep it turns rivers into rock. So the mountains hold their positions. The pebbles rest, unmoving, in whatever shape the last of the flowing gave them, ages ago. The bedrock beneath every channel has not shifted for as long as anyone has watched this moon, and probably for far longer than that. And yet, and this is the quiet turn worth carrying forward, something on Titan refuses that same stillness entirely. Something is moving across all that motionless stone water, finding paths, pooling into low basins, catching what little light reaches the surface, and throwing it back in faint, dark ribbons, gathering into channels, spreading into deltas, filling basins until they overflow into the next basin down the slope. If the ordinary liquid of our world has been frozen into mountains, then what? In a place this unrelentingly cold could possibly remain loose enough, restless enough, itself enough to flow. Let the distance settle in for a moment longer, because distance is really the whole story here. 1 billion miles is not an easy number to hold in the mind, so let it become something simpler. It is the difference between standing close enough to a fire to feel its heat on your face, and standing so far from that same fire that only a memory of warmth reaches you, carried thin across a great dark room. Earth keeps its comfortable middle distance from the sun, close enough that water can be born as rain and rise again as vapor in an easy, endless cycle. Titan keeps a far colder distance, one that was decided long before this moon ever had rivers or rain or haze. Back when the solar system itself was still arranging its furniture, planets and moons finding the orbits they would keep for billions of years afterward. Titan simply drew a farther seat, out past the asteroid belt, out past Jupiter's crowded neighborhood, into Saturn's slow, wide circuit around the sun. Being born that far out was never a misfortune for this moon. It was simply the address it was given, the particular porch light it was left to sit under, dim and orange, and utterly its own. Under that dim ceiling, the geology itself becomes something almost unfamiliar to describe using ordinary words, because the words themselves were built for a warmer world. When you hear mountain, you likely picture granite or basalt, forged in a planet's molten interior and pushed skyward over eons. Titan's equatorial ridges rise instead from water alone, water that behaves exactly as stone behaves everywhere else, catching what little light reaches them and casting long, faint shadows across plains dusted here and there with a fine, dark organic frost drifting down from the haze above. There is something oddly reassuring in this if you let yourself sit with it rather than resist it. Nothing about this world is broken, or wrong, or short of some ingredient it desperately needed. It is only cold enough, in one exact and specific way, that the substances have simply swapped roles, water stepping back to become the foundation, something else stepping forward to become the flow, and the whole solid world beneath Titan's rivers resting in a permanence that borders on peace. And yet, something does flow, even over stone-hard water, even at the bottom of that terrible cold, and the answer is a kind of secret so simple it feels like a lullaby once you hear it. Every substance in the universe, you might imagine, carries its own narrow window of weather within it, a private range of temperatures where it agrees to be liquid at all. Above that window, it drifts off as vapor. Below it, it locks itself into something hard and unmoving, a solid keeping its own counsel. Water's window, the one you have always lived inside without ever noticing it as a window, sits comfortably around the mild degrees of an ordinary Earth day. Methane's window sits somewhere else entirely, out past everything you have ever felt on your skin, hovering between roughly -182 and -161 degrees Celsius. And Titan, as if placed there on purpose, as if some careful hand had measured the distance and set the moon down with exquisite precision, orbits Saturn resting almost exactly inside that narrow methane window, not colder, where the rivers would seize into ice and go still forever, not warmer, where they would lift away as invisible gas and empty the lakes into the sky. Just there, held, the way a held breath is held, steady, unstrained, indefinitely sustainable. Beside the methane drifts its quieter companion, ethane, formed high in Titan's haze when sunlight, faint as it is out there, still finds enough strength to rearrange a few stray molecules of methane drifting through the upper air. The broken pieces recombine into ethane and sift slowly downward, over centuries, joining the methane already pooled in the lowlands. Together the two liquids blend into the seas and rivers you are drifting above tonight, mixing the way two gentle currents might mingle without either one losing itself. It is worth resting on this a moment, because it explains almost everything about why this moon feels the way it does, not like a hazard waiting to happen, but like a world that has simply arranged its plumbing according to its own particular thermostat. A thermostat set by distance from the sun and by nothing more dramatic than that. Here is the reframing worth carrying with you as you drift, because it dissolves the alarm before the alarm can even form. What you and I call fuel, back on the warm, oxygen-soaked world we came from, is only fuel because of what our world happens to be made of and how warm our particular patch of space happens to run. Methane earns that word, fuel, purely because on Earth it behaves as a compressed energetic gas that burns eagerly in our thick, oxygen-rich air, releasing the light and heat we've learned to store in tanks and pipe into our homes. But strip away the borrowed vocabulary for a moment and look at what methane is actually doing on Titan, out past the reach of any spark, and you find it is doing exactly what water does here. It is simply the moon's liquid. It is Titan's water. It fills basin after basin the way our oceans fill their basins, and it forms lakes the size of small countries the way our own lakes rest quietly in valleys carved by glaciers long gone. It threads down through valleys and floodplains as rivers, patient and unhurried, carving channels into the icy bedrock, the same slow, persistent way the Colorado carved its canyon into stone, given only enough time. It rises from the surface as faint vapor, drifts upward into pale clouds, and eventually returns as rain, falling back onto the same shores it rose from in an endless, familiar, almost tender cycle: evaporation, cloud, rainfall, return, over and over, season after long Titanian season. It is not standing in for water. It is not a strange substitute pressed into service because nothing better was available. On its own terms, in its own cold home, it is simply the ordinary liquid of an ordinary Titanian day. The thing that fills a cupped hand there the way water fills one here. If you can imagine, for a moment, a hand that could bear the cold enough to cup it. So when you hear the word fuel attached to these rivers, let it soften rather than sharpen, because the word itself is really only a passport stamp from our home address. It says more about where you and I come from than about what the liquid is doing out there in the dark beneath Saturn's rings. Bring a lantern close to a river on Earth, and nothing happens. Bring a lantern close to a river of methane on Titan, and in the coldest, safest sense of the phrase, still nothing happens. Because there under that hazy orange sky, it is not fuel at all. It is simply the shape water takes when a world is built 180 degrees colder than the one that raised you. It is the plain, unremarkable liquid of the local landscape, unremarkable to Titan the way rain is unremarkable to you, both of them just weather, just geography, just the quiet arithmetic of temperature meeting chemistry and settling into a truce that has held for billions of years. Picture it this way, if it eases the drifting. Somewhere on Earth tonight, a child is being told that water is precious, that it falls from clouds and gathers in rivers and finds its way home to the sea, and no one thinks to call that dangerous. Because it isn't. Because it is only water behaving exactly as water behaves. On Titan, beneath a sky the color of a low autumn sun, some equally patient process is unfolding. Methane lifting from a lake, drifting as pale cloud, cooling and letting go. Falling as slow rain onto a floodplain of rounded ice pebbles, then gathering itself back into a channel and wandering, unbothered, toward the nearest sea. There is no more urgency in that Titanian rainfall than in an earth shower moving across a quiet valley. There is no more danger folded into a Titanian riverbed than into the bed of any stream you might have waded through as a child. Cool water sliding over smooth stones under your bare feet. The chemistry differs, the geography, the outline, the unhurried logic of it does not. A world simply builds its water out of whatever liquid its particular temperature allows, and Titan, sitting so very far from the sun, was handed methane and ethane instead of the molecule we happened to receive. Neither choice was made with any purpose in mind. Both simply settled into place the way a marble settles into the lowest point of a bowl, and both have gone on quietly obeying gravity and temperature ever since, without complaint, without incident, for longer than there have been eyes anywhere to watch them do it. And so the word fuel, once you have carried it this far, begins to lose its old weight entirely. It stops sounding like a warning and starts sounding like an accent, a small linguistic leftover from a warmer, brighter, more oxygen-drenched home. Out here, above these wide, unhurried channels, the word simply doesn't apply in the way your body still half expects it to. There is nothing coiled, nothing waiting, nothing tense beneath that dark mirror-still surface. There is only a moon going quietly about the business every world goes about, moving its liquid from sky to sea, to river and back again, on a schedule so patient it is measured in centuries rather than hours, so slow that nothing about it could ever be mistaken for urgency. And this thought alone is enough to let something in your chest loosen, because it means these dark, glassy rivers carry no ambition, no readiness, no waiting tension coiled beneath their calm surfaces. They are not standing by for a spark. the way a puddle of gasoline in a warm garage seems to hold its breath, tense with possibility, until you understand it is doing nothing of the kind. Where you are drifting now, above channels that would, on Earth, ignite from the smallest careless flame, there is no flame anywhere to imagine, no ember, no static charge waiting in the folds of the haze. The rivers simply run, the way rivers run everywhere, following the oldest law any liquid obeys, downhill, unhurried, toward the lowest waiting basin, filling it, spilling into the next. Tracing the same unbothered path water has always traced across every world patient enough to hold it. If it helps you rest, think of them not as fuel lying in wait, but as a second kind of water, one that only looks alarming because of the label we brought with us from home. A label that has no meaning at all where you are floating now. But even setting the label aside, even after resting in the knowledge that Titan's rivers are only doing what water does everywhere, there remains a deeper, more complete kind of safety still waiting to be unfolded here. A safety built not from distance or temperature, but from something even more fundamental, the very air these rivers rest beneath. Because a river's stillness is one kind of reassurance, and it has carried you this far tonight, but there is another, larger reassurance sitting just above it, folded into the sky itself, into the breath of the whole moon, into the plain absence of one particular ingredient that every flame on Earth has always quietly depended on, and that Titan, as it happens, has never once possessed. And this is the question worth resting inside for a while, because the answer is not a small reassurance. It is a whole world built by accident of chemistry to keep a promise it never had to make. You already know, somewhere in the old animal part of you, what fire needs. It needs something to burn. It needs warmth enough to wake that burning up, and it needs the one ingredient that never announces itself, the one that simply has to be there in the air around the flame, oxygen. Invisible, unnoticed, essential. 3 things, always together, or nothing happens at all. Take away even one, and every spark in the universe becomes just a small flicker of heat with nowhere to go. This is the oldest rule of fire there is, older than any hearth, older than any hand that ever struck flint against stone, older than the first ember carried carefully between cupped palms. And on Titan, drifting now beneath you in its low orange light, 2 of those 3 things are simply, permanently, absent, and one is present in an abundance that would seem, to a visitor from a warmer world, almost reckless, except that nothing about it is reckless at all. Think, for a moment, of how ordinary this rule feels on Earth, how rarely you have to think about it. A candle only burns because the room around it is, without your ever noticing, roughly 1/5 oxygen. A proportion so constant, so woven into the ordinary air of your bedroom, your kitchen, the street outside, that fire has always felt to us like a plain and simple fact of the world, something that simply happens when heat meets fuel. It is easy, from inside a life spent breathing that particular mixture of gases, to forget that this abundance is not universal. It is not written into the laws of physics that a planet or a moon must have oxygen loitering in its sky, ready to be claimed by any flame that asks. It is, instead, a local condition, true here, true now, true because of a long and specific history, and entirely optional everywhere else. Titan simply never received that gift, and so its air kept the shape it must have had at the very beginning, heavy, patient, closed. The fuel, of course, is everywhere. You already met it in the rivers and the low, wide plains, in the dark channels that thread down from the highlands like veins traced in ink. Titan has methane and ethane in abundance, spread across its surface in such quantity that if this were Earth, if this were water, we would call it an age of oceans. But an unhurried census of Titan's sky tells you the rest of the story. And the rest of the story is what lets you rest. The atmosphere above those rivers is thick, thicker than our own, pressing down with about 1.5 times the weight of Earth's air, and almost all of it, something near 95 parts in 100, is nitrogen. Inert, unreactive, the same patient gas that fills most of the air you are breathing right now, the gas that does nothing, asks nothing, simply takes up space and waits. Mixed through that nitrogen is the methane itself, rising in faint traces as vapor above the seas, and a little argon, and a hint of hydrogen. And that is essentially all. There is no free oxygen there. Not a trace worth measuring, not a molecule drifting loose and unclaimed the way it does here, wrapped invisibly around every one of us, around every candle we've ever lit, every match, every low fire, in every hushed home. It helps, maybe, to remember where our own oxygen came from, because it did not come from nowhere, and it did not come easily. For most of Earth's long history, our air did not have it either. The oxygen you are breathing at this very moment is not some ancient birthright of rocky worlds. It is a gift, made slowly, patiently, by nothing more dramatic than sunlight falling on something small and green. Somewhere in Earth's shallow ancient seas, tiny organisms learned to take that sunlight and, in the unremarkable business of feeding themselves, exhale oxygen as a kind of faint leftover. They did this for hundreds of millions of years before it began to matter to anything else. They did it in such staggering, uncountable numbers for so long that eventually the air itself changed around them, filled with a gas that used to be a rare and toxic waste product, and became, instead, the thing every animal on this planet now depends on to live. It is, when you think about it slowly enough, one of the strangest facts in all of natural history, that our capacity for fire, our torches, our hearths, our whole warm human relationship with flame exists only because something living once breathed it into being. Geologists can trace the moment in the old rock itself, in thin red bands of iron laid down across the ancient seafloor as that new oxygen met dissolved metal and rusted it, quietly into stone. A record written across something like 2 billion years, one patient layer at a time, long before there was any hand to strike a spark or any eye to notice the flame it made. Fire, on Earth, is a comparatively recent possibility. For most of this planet's history, even here, a lit match could not have existed either. Titan never had that. Whatever moved on Titan, if anything ever did, it never filled the sky with the breath of leaves. Its air stayed as it apparently began, heavy with nitrogen, laced with hydrocarbons, closed against that third and final ingredient the way a door stays closed, simply because no one has ever knocked. And so you can let a very particular, very old worry fall away now, if you were carrying it without noticing. Those rivers below you, wide and dark and full of fuel, are not waiting to ignite. They are not one lightning strike away from disaster, not one careless spark from becoming something terrible. There is no spark to be had. There is nothing in that entire sky that could carry a flame from one place to the next, because a flame needs oxygen to leap through, and Titan's air simply will not let it leap. You could, in theory, carry a burning torch down through that orange haze, and somewhere before it ever touched liquid methane, it would only dim, gutter, and go dark on its own, starved quietly of the one thing it needed and never finding it. This is the strange, gentle joke sitting at the center of Titan, and it is worth letting it settle over you now, unhurried and complete. A world made almost entirely of flammable liquid, laid out in seas and rivers and rain that would anywhere on Earth be treated as one of the most hazardous substances we know how to handle, and yet it may be one of the most fireproof places in the whole of the solar system. Not fireproof by luck. Not fireproof because nothing has ever tried. Fireproof by the deep architecture of its own chemistry, built into the very air the way stillness is built into deep water, or silence into snow. There is no vigilance required out there, no caution, no warning signs, no careful hands keeping watch over all that fuel through the long Titanian night. The safety is not a rule anyone enforces. It simply is the shape of the place, as fundamental to Titan as its cold, as its haze, as the low orange light that never quite brightens into day. Even the sunlight that does reach that surface, faint and filtered as it is, has nothing to ignite. Even the friction of wind across the dunes, even the slow grinding of ice against ice in some distant tremor beneath the crust, none of it has anywhere to go, because the missing ingredient is missing everywhere at once, evenly, completely, without exception, across the whole moon. You could search from pole to pole and never find a single pocket of air that behaves differently. The peace here is not local. It is total. You can let that thought carry you now, low and unhurried, the way the rivers themselves are carried down from the highlands toward the flat places where they gather. Because that is exactly where this quiet is leading. Somewhere ahead of you, north across this vast dim moon, past the last dark channels and the pale frost of the interfluves between them, the land begins to give way. Not to more river, not to more single, threading course, but to something wider. Something that stops behaving like a stream and starts behaving like a horizon. The fuel that has been gathering itself in droplets and rivulets and slow winding rivers all this way is up there, finally settling into something enormous, into basins large enough to hold whole seas, silent and dark and utterly at peace with themselves, waiting now for you to come and see how still a sea of fuel can truly be. And so you drift north, over the braided channels, over the deltas where the rivers finally let go of their shape and spread wide, until the land runs out beneath you and there is only liquid, from one horizon to the other, dark and steady under the orange haze. This is where all those rivers were going the whole time. This is where the thread of fuel that would burn if anyone struck a match finally opens into something too large to call a river at all. Titan keeps its true seas near the top of the world, clustered around the North Pole like a scatter of dark coins, and the largest of them is Kraken Mare. A body of liquid methane and ethane so vast that if you set it down on Earth, it would rival the Caspian, edge to edge. A sea by any honest measure, except that nothing in it could ever be thirsty, and nothing could ever drown a spark. Kraken's shorelines are so long and so folded with inlets and bays that mapping their full length has taken patient scientists years of comparing one radar pass against the next, matching faint bright edges from a decade of flybys the way you might trace a coastline by candlelight. A little more revealed with every visit. A strait somewhere near its middle pinches the sea into two connected basins, and currents there, real currents, gentle ones, driven by Titan's own slow tides beneath Saturn's enormous pull, may nudge the liquid back and forth through that narrow throat, the closest thing this fuel ocean has to a tide moving between two connected rooms of the same house. None of it announces itself. There is no crash of surf on Kraken's shore, no roar to carry across the haze. Whatever motion exists there is closer to the rise and fall of a sleeper's chest than to anything you would call weather. Beside it lies Ligeia Mare, smaller than Kraken but no less complete, and it is Ligeia that first let us measure how deep these fuel seas truly run. Cassini passed low overhead with its radar and sent a beam down through the liquid, and the beam did not scatter, did not vanish into murk the way sonar loses itself in a silty earth harbor. It went down, and came back, having touched bottom some 170 meters below the surface. That is the quiet marvel of it. The liquid is so free of grit, so unclouded by anything drifting or dissolved that a radar pulse could cross it the way light crosses clean glass. You can let that settle for a moment. A sea deep enough to swallow a 50-story building and clear enough in its own low, patient way to let a signal pass straight through and report honestly on what it found at the bottom. Nothing hidden, nothing turbulent enough to blur the message. Just liquid fuel, undisturbed, keeping its own accounting of depth for anyone who cared enough to ask. Imagine, for a moment, what such clarity would mean if you could stand at Ligeia's edge and look down rather than merely pass overhead in orbit. On Earth, even the cleanest lake hides itself a few meters down, swallowed by its own particles of silt and life. Ligeia keeps almost nothing suspended in it. No plankton clouding the water, no sediment stirred loose from a restless bottom, because so little disturbs that bottom in the first place. Light, if there were enough of it this far from the sun, could in principle travel a long way down before giving up. What little illumination does reach the surface from that faint, distant star seems to sink through the liquid the way a whisper carries through a quiet hall, thin but unobstructed, with nothing in its path to break it apart. Further along, smaller and more modest, sits Punga Mare, and past it a whole constellation of little lakes, some barely a few kilometers across, scattered over the pole like the last drops left in a basin after the larger pools have claimed most of the liquid. Many of these smaller lakes sit inside strange round hollows with steep rims, as though something had once carved a bowl into the icy ground and the liquid had simply found its way in and stayed. A slow dissolving of the bedrock, perhaps, the fuel eating gently at its own container over spans of time too long for any single flyby to witness. Some of these lakes seem to fill and empty with the turning of Titan's long seasons, brimming when the rains of one hemisphere finally reach their appointed decade, receding when the sunlight, thin as it already is, nudges some part of the surface back toward vapor. None of it happens with any urgency. There is no flash flood on Titan, no sea that rises in an afternoon. Everything here moves on the moon's own unhurried schedule, a calendar written not in days, but in years stacked upon years, and the lakes simply keep their patient appointment with the sky, filling and thinning across spans of time that would outlast most of what happens in a single human life. And beyond even those, scattered across the pole like afterthoughts, lie dozens of smaller ponds so modest that some barely earned a name at all. Each one a private, self-contained world no larger than a village, holding its own portion of the same unlit fuel, answering to the same unhurried sky. Seen all together from above, the pole begins to look less like a coastline and more like a great dark constellation pressed flat against the ice, Kraken and Ligeia as the brightest stars in it, Punga a fainter companion nearby, and around them this scatter of smaller lights, each one filled with liquid that has never once known the touch of flame. What strikes you most, though, once you are close enough to see the surface itself, is not the size of these seas or even their improbable clarity, but their stillness. On Earth, water rarely holds still for long. Wind finds it, tides pull at it, currents stir it from beneath. But Kraken and Ligeia lie almost impossibly smooth. Their waves, when Cassini's instruments could detect any at all, measured not in the meters or centimeters you would expect of an ocean, but in millimeters, ripples so faint they are closer to a held breath than to weather. Titan's winds near the surface are famously gentle, and it's thick. Heavy air does not whip the liquid the way Earth's thinner atmosphere whips its oceans. Between one and the other, the seas of fuel have settled into something closer to a mirror than to water as you have ever known it. Under that dim orange sky, the surface holds the haze's own reflection so faithfully that from above, sea and sky begin to look like two halves of the same soft, glowing thought. Hinged together at a horizon you can barely find. And into that mirror, every so often, something strange and brief intrudes. Watching the same patch of Ligeia across different passes, the radar occasionally found a bright feature where none had been before. A small, pale patch riding the surface, present on one flyby, faded or gone on the next. Scientists began calling them magic islands, half in jest, because nothing about them behaved like solid land. The leading thought is that they are not islands at all in any lasting sense, but transient rafts, perhaps nitrogen gas working its way up from deeper in the liquid and gathering as fine bubbles near the surface. Perhaps a thin skin of organic solids stirred loose and floating for a while before settling back down. Perhaps waves too small to measure any other way, briefly catching the radar's eye. Whatever the true cause, the magic islands never last. They rise into the mirror, hold their small, unlikely shape for a matter of hours or days, and then dissolve back into the same unbroken plane, as if the sea had only been dreaming them and had now decided, without any fuss, to go on being unbroken. It is worth returning here, at the edge of this vast unlit water that is not water, to the promise carried all the way from the very first descent. These are rivers, and now these are seas, that would burn if anyone ever struck a match. And no one ever will. Not a soul stands on Titan's dark shorelines with anything that could spark. Not a single ember drifts across that heavy nitrogen air to find the fuel waiting below it. The seas simply lie there, patient and combustible and perfectly safe all at once, keeping a kind of promise that no one had to make and no one has to guard, because the moon itself has already arranged for it to be kept. Kraken stretches on, wide as a small ocean of home. Ligeia holds its 170 meters of secret, clear straight down. Punga waits at the edge of the pole, with its smaller kin, filling slowly, emptying slower yet, and over all of them, the surface lies flatter, stiller, more entirely at peace than any sea you have known under any sun, so still that stillness itself starts to feel less like an absence of motion and more like a presence of its own, something you could be lowered into and simply held by, without a ripple ever finding you, without anything asking anything of you at all. Let yourself come down toward that surface now, closer than any radar ever traveled, down to where the haze above and the sea below nearly touch, and where, for a little while, nothing in this world will move faster than a slow-held breath. That stillness is where you rest now, held above the mirror of Ligeia Mare, the sea's flat immensity spreading out beneath you in every direction until haze and horizon become the same color of amber. You are not falling. You are not floating the way you might float in a warm bath at home, with effort in your limbs and water pressing back. Here there is no pressing, no effort. Only a sustained and total support, as if the whole moon had reached up and cupped you in its palm. Consider the gravity first, because it is the gravity that makes this possible. Titan pulls on you with only about 1/7 of the weight Earth demands of your body. If your bed at night holds you down with the patient insistence of gravity, tonight that insistence has loosened its grip by nearly 7/8, and your body, heavy, tired, sinking usually into the mattress, floats instead, buoyant, unburdened. A held breath rises without asking. A hand let go finds it does not fall so much as drift, unhurried, weightless. Then consider the air. Titan's atmosphere is thicker than Earth's, pressing close and dense around everything on the surface. Dense enough that a person wearing wings, simple wings, strapped to the arms, could beat them once and rise into the orange sky the way a bird rises here. The air itself becomes a kind of second sea, one made of nitrogen instead of methane, but no less capable of holding a body up. Between the gravity pulling faintly down and the heavy air pushing evenly up, you exist in a kind of perfect balance, neither sinking nor straining, cradled between two forces that have agreed, for tonight, to ask nothing of you. Picture it as two hands meeting beneath you, one hand made of thin gravity, the other made of dense, patient air, and your whole body resting in the seam where the two hands meet. There is no gap to fall through. There is no current to fight. Every part of you, from the crown of your head to the soles of your feet, is supported at once, evenly, the way a held note is supported by an entire orchestra beneath it, rather than by any single instrument straining alone. You could let your knees drift apart, let your chin tilt back, let your fingers uncurl one by one, and nothing about that unclenching would cost you your place above the sea. Unclench then. There is truly nowhere to fall to here. So let yourself be carried. Imagine the sensation precisely. Your back finds the surface of Ligea Mare not as something hard or wet in the way you know wet, but as something closer to being laid across the smoothest, most tranquil silk anyone has ever woven. A fabric 170 meters deep in places, clear enough that Cassini's radar once slipped all the way down through it to touch stone, before returning to tell us how far it had traveled. You are lying on the surface of a sea so smooth that its waves, if you could call them that, rise only fractions of a millimeter, smaller than anything your body could ever register as motion. There is no rocking, there is no swell. There is only a level, patient plane extending outward until it dissolves into haze, and you resting at the exact center of it, weightless, held, going nowhere and needing to. Somewhere beneath you, far beneath. Past the reach of any thought you need to finish tonight, bubbles of nitrogen may be rising through the deep dark of the sea, catching starlight or haze light in a way that makes small patches of the surface glimmer and vanish. Glimmer and vanish. The way a thought arrives at the edge of sleep and then is gone before it can be named. Scientists call these fleeting bright patches magic islands, because that is what they resemble from above, small kingdoms of light that appear on the mirror and dissolve again into it, keeping no record of themselves, asking nothing of anyone who saw them. You do not need to watch for them. You do not need to wait for them. They will come and go on their own schedule, far below your drifting back, and whether you notice them or not changes nothing about how completely this sea continues to hold you. Above you, the haze thins in places, and it is from one of those thinner patches that the rain begins, not suddenly, not the way rain announces itself at home, with a first sharp patter on a roof, but as a kind of tender decision the sky makes, unhurried, a decision it has been considering for a very long time. The drops that fall on Titan are larger than the raindrops you know, heavier in shape though not in weight, and because the air is so thick and the gravity so faint, they do not fall so much as sink the way a snowflake sinks through still winter air back home, drifting sideways as often as downward, taking their time, in no rush to arrive anywhere. A drop like that might take what would feel, on Earth, like several long minutes to travel the height of a single cloud. Here it simply drifts, tumbling in lazy arcs, catching the last amber light before it lowers itself, at last, onto the sea, or onto your outstretched hand, or onto your cheek, landing with no more force than a fingertip laid there, and then lifted away. Let a few of them find you if they will. They are only methane, only ethane, the same easy liquid that fills the sea beneath you, falling now from the sky the way rain falls anywhere, except here it falls at a fraction of the speed, drop after drop lowering itself into your open palm like something set down rather than thrown, something placed rather than released. Notice how long a single drop takes to cross the last stretch of open air above you, tumbling end over end, unbothered, as if it had already decided there was no reason to hurry toward a sea that has been waiting for it, patiently, for longer than any name has existed to call it a sea at all. Nothing about this rain asks you to move out of its way. Nothing about this sea asks you to swim. You are simply present in the middle of both. Sky above lowering its unhurried gifts, sea below holding you level and sure, and the whole scene entirely, permanently without danger. Because remember what these rivers are. Out here at the edges of the story you have been told tonight, they are rivers that would burn if anyone ever struck a match. And no one ever will. There is no flame in this atmosphere, no ember waiting in this cold, no spark hidden anywhere in this entire orange world to turn any of it dangerous. The sea beneath your back could be lit only in some other universe with some other sky. In this one, it simply lies still and holds you, endlessly unlit, endlessly safe. Its fuel forever resting rather than burning. You may let that certainty settle into your chest the way the rain settles onto the sea, completely, without resistance, and without any need to check that it is true. It is true. It has always been true here, and it will still be true tomorrow and the day after, for as long as this orange moon keeps its slow orbit around Saturn. So there is nothing left to guard against here, nothing to brace for. Let your shoulders lower into that impossible cushion of liquid and faint gravity. Let your arms open along the surface, palms up, receiving whatever drops choose to arrive. Let your breathing settle to match the pace of the rain, each inhale as unhurried as a drop sinking from cloud to sea. Each exhale released the way the sea releases its own faint vapor upward, patient, in no rush to be anywhere else. You are not required to swim, or to steer, or to keep yourself afloat. The moon is doing all of that for you. The way it has done for however many drowsy centuries this rain has been falling onto this exact unchanging sea. And because you are held so completely, you can let your attention wander upward now, following one particular drop back the way it came, watching it rise, in your mind, back up through the orange dark, back through the layer where it first gathered its shape out of vapor, back into the lingering methane clouds that have been assembling themselves above Titan for longer than any calendar this moon might keep. That single drop is only one small traveler in a much larger, much slower circuit, one that lifts the sea into cloud and lowers cloud back into sea again and again, season after unhurried season, the whole moon breathing in its own patient rhythm, and it is that rhythm, that faint cycle of rising and falling, that the night now drifts toward next. Up and away from the surface of the sea, into the weather that made the rain that is still, even now, settling around you. Follow that one raindrop then, as it lifts back up into the haze, because it is not falling alone into emptiness, it is part of something whole, something that circles and returns, the way your own breath goes out into the dark room and finds its way back to you. Titan, of all the worlds we have ever measured, is the only other place we know that holds a complete weather cycle, start to finish. The same unhurried loop that has always carried water around the earth. Except here, every part of it is made of the fuel that will never find its spark. High above the seas, the warmth of a thin and distant sun is enough to lift a little of that liquid off the surface, coaxing methane and ethane up into vapor, the way morning coaxes mist from a pond. That vapor rises, cools, and gathers itself into clouds, pale, slow-moving companions drifting mostly near the poles, where the seas are. Patient shapes that carry the promise of rain without ever hurrying to deliver it. And when they do let go, it is nothing like a storm the way you might picture one. The drops fall the way you have already imagined them falling on you, unhurried, wide, taking their time through air 4 times thicker than the air above your own bed, so that a fall which would take seconds at home stretches out into something closer to a long, easy sigh. Some of that rain never even reaches the ground. It thins to nothing partway down, a mist that simply gives itself back to the sky. What does reach the surface finds its way into channels that have been carved patiently, over unthinkable spans of time, into the water-ice bedrock. Networks of rivers branching and rejoining, like veins traced beneath skin, like the lines in a leaf, like the quiet paths water finds through sand at the edge of any ordinary shore. These are the same rivers the thread of tonight keeps returning to, rivers that would burn if anyone ever struck a match, and no one ever will, because there is no spark in that whole wide sky to strike them with. So they only ever do what rivers do. They gather, they braid, they carry small stones smoothed round by centuries of gentle tumbling, and they go looking for the sea. The probe that once fell through that orange air and landed among those very stones photographed this on its way down, and its pictures still feel, even now, like something out of a dream you might already be half inside of. Dark, branching channels threading across a paler plain. Tributaries meeting the way rivers meet on Earth. Valleys cut by liquid that no longer runs there but once must have. And, closer to the ground, networks that still do. Feeding shorelines in deltas where the moving liquid slows, spreads, and settles its sediment into fans as unhurried and as patient as anything drawn by water anywhere in this solar system. It is a landscape that behaves like home, and yet is not home at all. A place that learned the same slow grammar of erosion and deposit, of high ground and low, of water finding its way downhill, except that every word of that grammar is written here in fuel instead of water, in cold instead of warmth, in a sky with no oxygen to strike a flame from any of it. But the pace of all this, the true, deep pace of it, is where the real rest of the thing lives. Because nothing about Titan's weather is in any hurry. A year on Titan is not a year the way you know one. It takes very nearly 30 of your own Earth years for this small moon to complete a single slow circuit of the Sun alongside Saturn. And within that long, wide loop, Each season lingers for roughly 7 Earth years before easing into the next. Think of what that means for the lakes themselves. For the rain that falls near one pole today, it is not falling into a system that will shift and change and empty itself out again before the season is over. It is falling into a rhythm so vast and so patient that the liquid can spend decades, whole human childhoods, simply settling into place. Over those centuries of unhurried weather, the seas themselves seem to drift, filling more deeply near whichever pole is settled into its long winter, drawing down near the pole, leaning toward what little sun there is, a tide that takes not hours but human lifetimes to complete even half its motion, migrating between north and south the way a held breath might slowly release. There is almost nothing sudden here. Storms, where they happen at all, are rare enough that instruments watching from orbit might catch only a handful across years of steady observation, brief brightenings of cloud that flare and fade over the span of days before the sky settles back into its long, plain patience. Rain itself, even when it comes, seems to fall less like weather and more like breathing, a slow exhale of vapor turning to liquid, turning to more liquid, joining a drainage that has had eons to learn exactly where it wants to go. There is no lightning here worth fearing, no true storm surge, no flash flood arriving without warning, because everything on this moon, from the size of its year down to the fall of a single drop, moves at a drowsy, deliberate tempo, the tempo of a world with nowhere urgent to be. Even the erosion happens this way, patient, cumulative. A river not cutting so much as easing its channel a little deeper with each passing century, the way a held hand slowly warms, the way a long night slowly gives way to morning without anyone quite marking the moment it happened. If you could rise now, up and away from the low mist and the wide, dark seas and the slow rivers still braiding their way toward shorelines below, you would begin to see how all these small, unhurried motions belong to something far larger. The clouds thin as you climb, the orange deepens and softens the higher you go, and gradually the separate rivers and lakes and drifting rain stop reading as events happening one after another, and start reading as a single, whole, breathing system. One moon, wrapped in its own hazy atmosphere, holding a complete and gentle weather inside itself. From high enough, the shorelines curve away into the dimness, the seas become pale mirrored shapes rather than individual places, and the whole moon begins to gather itself into one soft, round presence, hanging in the dark. A world quietly running its long, slow cycle, the way a chest quietly rises and falls in sleep. Notice, too, how little any of this cycle resembles struggle. On Earth, water moves through storm and drought, through flood and fracture, through weather that can turn on itself within hours. Here, the whole loop unfolds as though it has already decided, long ago, that there is no reason to rush. Evaporation lifting only as much as the faint sunlight allows, clouds gathering only as fast as the cold permits, rain descending at the leisurely pace of something that knows it will be caught, eventually, by ground that has been waiting for it since before there were eyes anywhere to watch it fall. Even the rivers seem to understand this. Where a river on Earth might carve a canyon in a handful of energetic seasons, a channel on Titan takes its shape the way a lullaby takes its shape. One repeated, familiar phrase at a time, over and over, until the deep groove is simply there, without anyone having marked the moment it was finished. Picture the deltas again for a moment. Low and pale where the last of the rivers meet the sea, each one a fan of dark sediment laid down not in a single storm, but across thousands of these long, slow years, the liquid slowing as the ground flattens, releasing whatever fine grains it has carried, spreading them out in patient layers the way a hand might smooth a blanket flat before drawing it up and over you. The shoreline itself keeps almost no memory of a violent edge, no crashing surf, no wind-torn foam, only a soft meeting of pale liquid and paler ground, rising and falling by inches across years rather than by feet across hours. Somewhere among those quiet deltas, the very stones the little probe once photographed still rest exactly as they were left, rounded not by any sudden event, but by the same unhurried liquid passing over them again and again, for longer than any single season could ever hold, until every hard edge had been coaxed gently away. This is the rhythm you can let yourself sink into now, not weather as something to brace for, but weather as something closer to a held breath, in and out, over years instead of minutes, so slow that an entire human lifetime might pass while a single cloud has barely finished drifting from one shoreline to the next. And beyond even that curved, glowing edge of Titan, waiting in the deeper dark the higher you climb, something vast and pale and rimmed with light is already beginning to appear, patient, enormous, and utterly still, exactly the kind of stillness this whole night has been leading you gently toward. And as you rise above the last soft rain, above the braided rivers and the deltas still glistening from a storm that took a human lifetime to fall, the whole shape of the weather falls away beneath you, and something larger takes its place. You keep climbing, unhurried, past the last curl of orange haze, until Titan is no longer a world stretched out beneath your feet, but a small round thing you could hold in your two open hands. It hangs there, a pale amber pearl, veiled in its own breath, and beside it, impossibly close, impossibly enormous, Saturn fills half of everything, its rings drawn out in faint concentric hush. Its banded gold and cream turning with a patience that makes the fastest hurricane on Earth look like a held breath. You are not falling toward it. You are simply floating near it, the way a thought floats near sleep, close enough to feel its size, and far enough to feel none of its weight. From here, the numbers stop being numbers and become something closer to a lullaby. This small pearl and its vast, calm companion drift together some 1.4 billion kilometers from the sun, so far that the star which floods your daytime sky with warmth and color has shrunk, out here, to a bright and steady point of light, no brighter than a porch lamp seen from the far end of a long dark field. There is no dawn on Titan the way you know dawn, no noon that burns. There is only that faint star, small and faithful, giving its last, thinnest gift of light to a moon that keeps its rivers of fuel flowing anyway, unbothered, because it does not need the sun's heat to be whole. And you, drifting here in the space between the pearl and its ringed giant, are smaller than either. Smaller than the smallest visible ring, smaller than a single cloud in that banded gold. It should perhaps feel like nothing. It should feel like disappearing. It does not. Out here, smallness stops being a kind of erasure and becomes something closer to permission. There is nothing left for you to hold up, nothing left for you to carry, nothing that depends on the size of your shoulders. Saturn does not need you to keep it turning. Titan does not need you to keep its rivers running toward the seas that would burn if anyone ever struck a match, and no one ever will. Because there is no one out here to strike one. Only the two of you, the small watching you, and the vast unhurried world beside you, existing at exactly the scale it was always going to exist at, whether or not you ever came to look. That is the relief hiding inside the size of things. You do not have to be large to belong here. You only have to be present, the way a single breath belongs to a whole sleeping body, small and necessary, and entirely at ease. Notice, too, how little any of this asks of you. There is no instrument to read out here, no distance to calculate, no lesson waiting at the end of the view. You are only asked to look, the way you might look up at a ceiling in the dark, and let your eyes adjust until the shapes of the room become familiar again. Saturn's rings, seen from this near, resolve into faint bands within bands, thousands of them, each one a scatter of ice no bigger than a snowflake or a boulder, moving together in a single wide, unbroken orbit that has held its shape since long before the first eye on Earth ever opened to see anything at all. None of those countless fragments needs to understand the ring to belong to it. Each one simply travels its own small arc, patient and included, and the ring is only ever the sum of all of them resting together in the same slow motion. You could be one of those fragments tonight, small, held, moving without effort inside something far larger that asks nothing of you but your presence. And Titan, it turns out, keeps a second smallness folded away inside its first, a secret nested so deep that even the fuel-bright rivers on its surface are only the outer visible layer of something far more private underneath. Beneath the frozen crust, beneath that bedrock of water ice grown harder than granite in the endless cold, there lies another ocean entirely, one made of real, familiar liquid water, kept from freezing by the moon's own inner warmth and by salts dissolved through it, the way salt moves through the sea at home. It is thought to rest tens of kilometers down, a dark and hidden layer sandwiched between an icy shell above and a rocky core below, sealed away from starlight for as long as the moon has existed. No rain has ever touched it. No wind has ever crossed it. It has never once seen the faint far sun that lights the surface far above it, and it does not need to. It simply rests there, patient and unlit, in a silence so complete that scientists learn of its presence only indirectly. From the faint way Titan's whole body flexes and stretches under Saturn's tides, the way a hidden layer of something soft can be felt through the give in a mattress, even with the light off, even with your eyes closed. So think of what you are floating above now, as you hang here beside the ringed giant. On the surface, rivers and seas of liquid fuel, cold beyond anything your body has ever known, flowing forever unlit across a bedrock of frozen water. And far beneath that surface, sealed under kilometers of ice, an entire second ocean, this one made of true water, dark and salted and warm enough at its own great depth to stay liquid, folded away from every storm and every season happening so patiently above it. An ocean inside an ocean. A held thing inside a held thing. It is not so different, really, from the way you are resting right now. A quiet body inside a quiet room, inside a quiet night, inside a turning world. Layer folded gently around layer, each one keeping the next one safe, without either needing to know the shape of what it protects. Titan does not perform this nesting for anyone. It simply is this way, the same as you are simply, right now, warm beneath whatever covers you, without having to prove it to the dark. There is something almost tender in that thought. A whole moon built, without any intention at all, in the same shape as a person tucked into bed, an outer stillness wrapped around an inner one, cold holding warm, hard holding soft. The visible world keeping careful, unconscious watch over the hidden one beneath it. You do not need to understand every layer of yourself to be held by all of them at once. Titan does not either. It carries its second ocean the way you carry your own slow heartbeat while you sleep, present, working, entirely unbothered by whether anyone above is paying attention. And being small beside something this vast, this layered, this unhurried, is not a lonely feeling at all out here. It is closer to being carried, the way an infant is carried without needing to hold on. The way a leaf on a wide, slow current does not need to know where the river leads in order to trust that it is moving somewhere gentle. Saturn turns nearby, enormous and unbothered, its rings a hush of ice and dust older than almost everything you know. Titan turns within that hush, small and layered and quietly whole, its outer rivers cold and unlit, its inner ocean warm and hidden, both of them simply continuing, night after night, circuit after circuit, without asking to be watched in order to be real. You can let yourself be this small tonight. You do not have to hold up anything out here. You are only floating, the way the moon floats, the way its inner sea floats beneath its frozen shell, carried by something larger and older and entirely, patiently in no hurry at all. Let that carrying settle into you for a moment before the next question arrives. It is a strange, tender kind of comfort, learning that the universe keeps its most fragile things folded deepest inside its toughest ones. A warm sea wrapped in miles of ice, wrapped in a moon, wrapped in the long, cold reach of a star's dimmest light, wrapped again in the hush of a ringed giant's shadow. Nothing about that arrangement is fast. Nothing about it is anxious. Every layer simply rests where it has always rested, unwitnessed for most of its existence, and none the less real for having gone so long unseen. You could think of your own night this way, if it helps. The room around you, the walls around the room, the dark around the house, layer after unhurried layer, standing quietly between you and everything else, each one asking nothing of you but to let it do its patient work. But even a moon this patient cannot keep its outer rivers flowing forever on faith alone, not with sunlight quietly, endlessly nibbling away at the very fuel that fills them, breaking it apart molecule by molecule across ages too long for a single lifetime to witness even the start of. And so a soft question rises now, unforced. The kind of question that drifts up naturally, rather than presses. If that bright, thinning starlight is always taking a little of the seas away, drop by unseen drop, then something, somewhere, must be quietly giving them back. Where does it come from, all of that fuel, replenished again and again across a span of time too vast to hold in one thought? And what is it, deep inside this small orange pearl, that keeps filling its rivers back up? And that question of where all this methane keeps coming from turns out to hold its own kind of tenderness, the kind that asks nothing of you but to listen. Because up in that high, hushed atmosphere, sunlight is doing something patient and irreversible. It is not the fierce, blistering sunlight you might imagine. Titan receives only a whisper of what Earth receives. A faint gold thinned by distance, but even a whisper, given tens of millions of years, is enough. Ultraviolet light drifts down through the haze and gently pries methane molecules apart, breaking their long-held bonds one by one, unhurried, the way a very slow hand might loosen a knot that has sat tied for a lifetime. This has been happening since long before the seas took their current shape, and it will keep happening long after tonight is over. And here is the quiet arithmetic that scientists carry with them, turning it over the way you might turn a smooth stone in your palm if this breaking has gone on, uninterrupted for tens or hundreds of millions of years. Then the seas of Kraken and Ligeia and Punga should have thinned to nothing ages ago. The rivers that would burn if anyone struck a match should by now be dry riverbeds and empty basins, a fuel world that ran out of fuel long before anything arrived to notice. But they have not run dry. The seas are still there, still catching the low light, still lying flatter and calmer than any water on Earth. Which means, somewhere in Titan's own hidden machinery, something is topping the seas back up, quietly, continuously, at a pace matched almost exactly to the pace of the loss. It is one of the gentlest kinds of mystery there is, not an alarm, not an absence, but a balance so well kept that the world simply looks, from the outside, unbothered and whole. You are allowed to hold this the way Titan holds it, not as a puzzle demanding your attention before you can rest, but as evidence that some systems find their own equilibrium and keep it, without needing to explain themselves to anyone watching from so very far away. Think, for a moment, of how strange and how comforting that balance really is. A world losing its defining liquid, molecule by molecule, for longer than mountains on Earth have stood, and yet arriving in front of a listener tonight every bit as full as it must have been, long before the first human eye ever found Saturn's small companion in the dark. There is no frantic patch, no sudden flood rushing in to save the seas at the last possible moment. Whatever refills Titan does so unhurried and unseen, on a schedule that has nothing to do with urgency. Because urgency belongs to worlds like ours, where things happen fast enough to notice. On Titan, everything is stretched instead across such long, low arcs of time that the resupplying and the vanishing simply move together, side by side, like two slow currents that never quite pull apart. There are a few ideas about where the replenishing comes from, and none of them cancel out the mystery so much as deepen its hush. One possibility drifts up from far beneath the ice crust itself, cryovolcanoes, which are nothing like the fire mountains of Earth, nothing hot or violent at all. A cryovolcano on Titan would vent not molten rock but slush, icy, sluggish material rising from the warmer interior, carrying with it pockets of methane that have been sealed away since the moon was young, releasing them slowly into the sky the way a sleeper might exhale, long and even, without waking. If such vents exist, and a few smoothed dome-like features on Titan's surface hint that they might, then the moon is breathing its own fuel back into its own weather, cycle folded inside cycle, patient beyond any human patience. The other possibility rests even deeper, locked into structures called clathrates, a word that sounds sharper than the thing it describes, which is really just a soft cage of frozen water, its molecules arranged so that they trap methane inside, holding it the way cupped hands might hold something small and warm. Titan's icy shell may be riddled with these clathrate reserves, vast unseen stores of methane held in gentle captivity within the water-ice bedrock, released only slowly, only when conditions inside the moon allow it, seeping upward across spans of time too long for a single lifetime to witness even the beginning of. Either way, cryovolcano or clathrate, or perhaps some slow cooperation of both, the picture that emerges is of a world resupplying itself from within, an ocean fed not by rain from some outside source, but by its own interior, turning over on a timescale so unhurried that from where you rest tonight, it might as well be still. And what becomes of the methane once sunlight has taken it apart? This is where the story turns from arithmetic into something closer to falling snow. The broken pieces of those molecules do not simply vanish, they drift upward and sideways through Titan's sky, and in that cold, saturated air they begin finding each other again, recombining into heavier, more complicated carbon molecules, chains and rings built patiently out of what the sunlight broke. These new molecules are what give Titan its haze, its color at all. That soft, warm orange veil wrapped around the whole moon. The one you descended through at the very start of this journey. The haze is not a static curtain. It is a slow accumulation, constantly renewed, constantly falling. Scientists call these particles tholins, a word coined just for Titan, because nothing on Earth quite matches what they are. And fall they do, for eons, without hurry, sifting down from the upper atmosphere toward the surface, as something you might call amber snow. If snow could be soft and dry and endlessly slow, settling over the ice mountains and the fuel rivers and the flat mirrored seas in a layer that has been building for as long as Titan has had an atmosphere at all. There is something almost impossibly tender in what this tholin snow actually is. The same kind of carbon chemistry drifting down through Titan's sky tonight, the joining of simple molecules into more complex ones, patiently, in darkness without any living thing to witness it, is thought to resemble the chemistry that stirred on the early Earth. In the long, quiet stretch of time before life had found its first foothold here, Titan is not alive, and nothing suggests it ever will be. Its cold is too deep, its chemistry too different, its rivers too averse to anything resembling warmth. But in its unhurried orange snowfall, it may be running, endlessly and harmlessly, a kind of chemistry rehearsal. The same notes that once preceded the very first stirrings of biology on our own world played out now on a distant moon, with no audience at all, except perhaps a spacecraft passing far overhead, or a listener drifting toward sleep, learning of it many years later. You do not need to hold the weight of that thought. You only need to let it settle, faint as the snow it describes. Picture it settling, layer upon layer, across ages longer than any calendar you have ever kept. Beneath the pebble plains and beside the fuel-bright shorelines, that tholin snow has been gathering since long before there were shorelines to gather beside at all. A low blanket of dust the color of a dying campfire, centimeters deep in some places, perhaps far deeper in others, resting over ice mountains and lake beds alike. It asks nothing of the world beneath it. It simply arrives, particle by particle, the way thoughts arrive at the edge of sleep, too soft to notice one at a time, and yet enough of them, given enough patience, to change the color of an entire moon. So here is where you may leave it for tonight, because not every question needs an answer before you are allowed to rest. Whether the source is a cryovolcano exhaling from some warm hidden depth, or a clathrate cage slowly releasing what it has held for eons, or some braided combination the instruments have not yet fully resolved, the seas remain. They are not draining before your eyes. They are not vanishing between one era and the next. Somewhere below the frozen bedrock, in a rhythm too slow for worry and too patient for alarm, Titan keeps giving back almost exactly what its sky quietly takes away, and the orange snow keeps falling to remember the difference. Let this be less an unsolved case and more a lullaby with an unfinished verse. One that does not need finishing tonight, or perhaps ever, for you to feel the story's warmth and be soothed by it. Some mysteries are simply allowed to stay open, resting undisturbed the way the rivers rest, the way the seas rest, unlit and unbothered and entirely safe. It took, of course, a great many careful minds across a great many years to learn even this much, to notice the point of orange light in a telescope lens centuries ago, to read the first faint signature of methane in starlight passing through that distant air, to send machines across the vast dark on journeys measured in years rather than hours, patiently, one instrument, one flyby, one photograph at a time, until a small probe finally found its way down through the haze to touch the ground itself. The seas you have been carried across tonight, and the snow now drifting down upon them, are not only Titan's secret, they are also the quiet, unhurried inheritance of everyone who ever looked up, wondered, and decided the wondering was worth a lifetime. And it is worth remembering, as the haze settles back over the seas, that all of this was learned the long way, by patient watchers who never once saw the rivers with their own eyes, and yet trusted, across centuries, that something real was out there, waiting to be found. You can let their patience become your own now. You can let it carry you the last stretch of the way down into sleep. It begins with a single point of light. In the autumn of 1655, a young Dutch astronomer named Christian Huygens turns a hand-ground telescope lens toward Saturn and notices something keeping pace beside the planet, night after night, a faint companion tracing its own private orbit. He has no way of knowing what he has found, no way of knowing about orange haze, or rivers, or rain that falls the way snow falls, unhurried, taking its time to reach the ground. He knows only that there is a moon there, a point of light with a rhythm of its own, and he writes it down, and the world becomes, from that evening onward, one moon larger than it was the day before. For a long while afterward, that point of light is all Titan is to anyone. A dot, a calculation, a name eventually given in myth, waiting in the dark for someone to ask it a better question. Nearly 300 years pass before anyone does. Generation after generation of astronomers return to that same point of light, refining Huygens's simple observation, timing its orbit, weighing it against its neighbors, and still it keeps its true nature to itself, offering nothing more than the faint, steady glow of reflected sunlight. Then, in 1944, an astronomer named Gerard Kuiper passes that reflected sunlight through a spectrograph, splitting the faint light into its narrow bands the way a prism spreads a beam into color, and finds within it the unmistakable fingerprint of methane. It is a small mark on a strip of measurements, easy to miss, easy to walk past without a second glance. And yet it is the first time anyone on Earth learns that this distant moon has an atmosphere at all, that it is not simply a bare rock reflecting sunlight, but a world wrapped in air, with a chemistry of its own already at work in the dark, far beyond anything a telescope alone could have shown. No one yet imagines seas. No one yet imagines rain falling at the pace of snow. But the first thread has been found, the one that will, decades later, unspool into rivers that would burn if anyone ever struck a match, and no one ever will. For now it is only a line on a spectrum, a quiet clue tucked inside starlight, filed away and returned to now and then across the following years, and it is enough, in its modest way, to make Titan worth watching for another generation. That watching stretches on, unhurried, the way everything about this moon seems to move at its own patient tempo. Then, in 1980, a spacecraft called Voyager 1 sweeps past Saturn and turns its cameras toward Titan, hoping, at last, for a close look at a solid surface beneath that atmosphere. What it finds instead is a featureless orange veil, a haze so complete, so evenly distributed, that no oceans, no coastlines, no continents show through at all. It is, in its way, a gentle disappointment, the kind that only deepens a mystery rather than closing it. Titan keeps its secret a little longer, wrapped in that soft citrus fog, patient as ever. content to be glimpsed only as a smooth and glowing sphere while humanity's spacecraft continues on, out past Saturn's rings, into the wider dark. The moon simply waits. It has, after all, nowhere else to be, and neither, it turns out, does the question. Almost a quarter of a century later, the waiting is finally rewarded. In 2004, a spacecraft named Cassini slips into orbit around Saturn itself, carrying instruments built specifically to see through the haze that had turned Voyager away, radar that can feel the shape of a hidden surface the way a hand might trace a face in the dark, reading contours no eye could find. And tucked against Cassini's side rides a smaller vessel, a saucer no wider than a large table, named Huygens, carrying the astronomer's own name back to the moon he first noticed as a single point of light 3.5 centuries before. On January 14, 2005, that little probe separates and begins its fall. For 2.5 hours, it descends through Titan's thick orange atmosphere, swaying gently beneath a parachute in air 6 times denser than the air above your own bed, buffeted only softly, drifting rather than plunging. The whole descent slow enough that there is time, again and again, to simply notice what is passing outside the window, pale channels below that look, unmistakably, like riverbeds, dark patches that might be lakes, a landscape assembling itself out of haze the way a room assembles itself out of shadow when your eyes finally adjust. And then, with a landing so soft it barely disturbs the ground beneath it, Huygens comes to rest on a damp plain scattered with small rounded pebbles of water ice, worn smooth the way stones in a riverbed are worn smooth, by liquid moving over them for a very long time. It is humanity's farthest touchdown, a single spacecraft resting on solid ground far past the orbit of Mars, past the asteroid belt, past Jupiter, out where the rivers of fuel had been waiting all along, patient and unlit, for someone to finally arrive and simply look. The pebbles beneath Huygens tell their own slow story, one that needs no drama to be remarkable. They are rounded not by fire, not by violence, but by the same gentle, repeated motion that shapes every stone in every earthly stream, years upon years of liquid passing over them, smoothing every edge, asking nothing of them but patience. Above them, faintly, the probe's instruments catch something new, methane, released by warmth in the ground itself, drifting up in a thin and momentary breath, as if the plane itself has exhaled once, softly, and then gone still again. And then, its batteries spent, its brief work done, Huygens falls silent and stays there, a small quiet visitor, resting forever on a shore of ice pebbles beneath a sky the color of a low autumn sun. Cassini, meanwhile, continues on, circling Saturn for more than a decade afterward, returning again and again to sweep its radar across Titan's northern reaches, mapping the seas the way you might trace the shoreline of somewhere beloved with a single fingertip, slowly, over years, never quite in a hurry to finish. Each pass adds a little more to the picture, a new inlet here, a depth reading there, the faint shimmer of Ligeia Mari's floor appearing at last after the radar beam finds its way down and back through 170 meters of liquid clear enough to let it pass. Between those passes, months and sometimes years go by with Titan simply out of view, tucked behind Saturn's disk or turned away toward its own long winter, and the picture waits, unfinished, exactly where it was left, for the spacecraft to come back around. It is not fast work. It was never meant to be. It is the kind of work that unfolds across a decade, the way Titan's own seasons unfold across years. Each measurement a single soft brushstroke added to a portrait, that takes a very long time to complete, and is, even now, not entirely finished. The far southern shorelines still mostly guessed at, still waiting their own turn beneath a future radar beam. And the watching does not end there. Even now, on Earth, a small rotorcraft named Dragonfly waits its turn, built to do something no spacecraft has done before, to lift off from Titan's thick, buoyant air and fly, hopping gently from dune to dune, from shoreline to shoreline, across the 2030s, adding its own unhurried chapter to a story that began with a single point of light beside Saturn in 1655. It will not rush. Nothing sent to Titan ever does. It will drift down through that same orange haze the way Huygens once did, the way the methane rain itself does, taking its time. Because there has never been any reason on this world to do otherwise. So it has gone, era after era, each generation of watchers handing its patience to the next. A lens ground by hand, a beam of starlight split into color, a camera turned away by haze, a parachute swaying through 2.5 unhurried hours, a radar beam tracing a shoreline year after year, and soon, a small pair of rotors lifting into that thick citrus sky. Each one asked the same quiet question a little more closely than the last, and each one was answered slowly, the way Titan answers everything, never all at once, always eventually. And through every year of that long asking, the seas themselves simply continued on exactly as they always had. Kraken and Ligeia and Punga lying flat and silent under their haze, still full, still unlit, still waiting the way they have waited since long before anyone on Earth ever looked up and noticed a companion moving beside Saturn in the dark. Tonight has been about a world where water gave up being liquid and became the very bedrock beneath an orange sky, stone hard and ancient, holding its shape through cold too vast to argue with. Tonight has been about seas of fuel that can never burn, about rivers and lakes of liquid methane and ethane lying under a sky with no oxygen to answer them, safe in a way no ocean on Earth has ever quite managed to be. Tonight has been about a slow orange weather, about rain falling for hours instead of minutes, about rivers carving their unhurried paths toward seas that never rush to meet them. And tonight has been about hidden depths, about a real ocean of water resting far beneath the ice, kept warm by a patience older than most of what we know, waiting there the way an old secret waits, in no hurry to be found. None of this needs anything from you tonight. You do not need to remember the name of the moon, or the chemistry of the rain, or which region came first and which came last. You do not need to hold on to a single fact. All of it can drift loose now, the way it was always meant to, leaving behind only the feeling of having traveled somewhere far and safe and coming home again without ever opening your eyes. Somewhere out past the orbit of Saturn, that small orange world keeps turning in the dark exactly as it has for billions of years. Its rivers of fuel moving without any flame to threaten them, its buried ocean turning over slowly in a warmth no sunlight ever reaches. It does not need us to watch it. It was never waiting for us at all. And in that same way, you are not required to keep watching, or listening, or thinking, or doing anything further. You have already arrived exactly where you needed to be, which is here, in the dark, growing heavier by the minute. Another quiet exploration is already waiting on the screen for you, and you do not have to choose it, or reach for anything, or lift a single finger. Just let it begin on its own, arriving low in the background the way a tide comes in without asking permission, while whatever part of you is still listening slips further down into sleep. And if there is a corner of your mind still faintly awake, still curious, Here is something small to loosen into rather than answer. Nothing you need to solve tonight. Somewhere on a moon so cold that rivers run with fuel instead of water. What do you suppose the hush actually sounds like? Out there where there is no wind to carry any sound at all. You do not need to answer that. You do not need to answer anything. Let it float there, unanswered, the way a question can simply exist without ever needing a reply. The way this whole night can end without anything being finished, or solved, or completed. Feel the bed beneath you now, holding your full weight the way it has been holding you this whole time, patient and steady and entirely unbothered by how still you have become. Feel your breath moving low and unhurried, in and out, needing no attention from you at all, doing its own tender work exactly as it always has. Feel your eyelids growing heavy, resting the way stone rests, the way ice rests, the way a distant orange sea rests under a sky with no flame ever to trouble it. There is nowhere else to be. There is nothing else to do. Everything you needed to hear has already been said, and everything else can simply wait, patient, for as long as it needs to. Let your thoughts loosen the way a knot loosens when no one is pulling on it anymore. Let the last of the evening slide off you, faint and lingering, like warmth leaving a stone long after the sun has gone. Whatever you were carrying when this night began, you can set it down now, here, at the edge of sleep, and it will still be there tomorrow if you ever want it back, though most nights you find you do not. Let yourself sink. Let the dark hold you the way it holds every serene world drifting far out past the reach of any sun, unwatched, unhurried, entirely at peace. Sleep well.